My name is Dafydd Job. I am a retired pastor who lives in Bangor, and my grandfather was J.T. Job, a minister and a poet. His ideal was the poet-preacher. He had given himself to the work of the ministry, but also he wrote poetry, winning the chair 3 times and the crown once in Liverpool in 1900. He had, in one sense, given up competing in the Eisteddfod, but the subject appealed to him. Ein air volant, their Lord they will praise. And so he wrote a poem. He wasn't going to go to the Eisteddfod because he wasn't too well, but a telegram came the day before saying Enaf, which was his nom de plume, Enaf needed urgently. And so he went and was chaired as the victorious bard.
So my name's Iestyn Tyne. I am a poet, writer and musician. I'm also a researcher, and I've worked with Yr Ysgwrn in the past on some interpretation work relating to Hedd Wyn's Eisteddfod chairs that he won before the famous Black Chair. But in this context, I've been researching the story behind the 1918 chair, won by J.T. Job and created by Eugene Van Fleteren in Birkenhead. Eugene Van Fleteren was a Belgian war refugee. He'd come via Antwerp and London and settled in Birkenhead, where of course the National Eisteddfod of 1917 was to be held. And he received a commission from Lord Leverhulme, who was sponsoring the prize, to create a chair for the winning poets. We award the chair at the National Eisteddfod for the best awdl or ode, which is a strict metre poem extending often to several hundred lines. Eugene Van Fleteren received the commission for the 1917 chair, and then the commission for 1918 was set as a competition in the Eisteddfod. He submitted to the competition and was successful, so he made 2 consecutive Eisteddfod chairs. One, of course, the famous Black Chair, which has been housed here at Yr Ysgwrn for over a century, and the other, far lesser known chair for the Neath Eisteddfod of 1918.
I always knew that Eugene Van Fleteren had carved this chair. We had a small card with his name on it, and my father had told me he was a refugee from Belgium. I didn't realise that Eugene Van Fleteren was the one who carved the chair that Hedd Wyn won, until we decided to visit Yr Ysgwrn. And in reading up beforehand, I realised it was the same man who'd carved both chairs.
Well, it was quite a surprise to find out that Eugene Van Fleteren had made a second National Eisteddfod chair. Hedd Wyn's story and the Birkenhead Eisteddfod of 1917 is, of course, very well known. However, this had completely gone under the radar, really, until Dafydd Job visited the Yr Ysgwrn and told a member of staff here. It was quite special, really, and it's been an opportunity to learn more about that chair, but also the poet J.T. Job, who won that chair, who himself wrote a poem that was deserving of the award, and who came through many trials and tribulations of his own to reach that point. So it's very special to be able to tell a bit of his story as part of this exhibition. And of course, being 2 consecutive years, it's really interesting to look at them both and see the development in the carpenter's craft, the craft of Eugene Van Fleteren, and of course the workmen who would have helped him create the chairs, and that they're 2 different chairs that have their own identity as well. The Black Chair is almost more austere and is made specifically for the occasion. Of course, it was a commission, whereas the 1918 chair, I get the impression the maker kept his options open a bit. The plaque to denote the details of the Eisteddfod is much smaller, more discreet, and there's far less about the rest of the design of the chair that ties it to that particular Nyth Eisteddfod of 1918. So it may have been that he wasn't sure if he was going to win the competition. So he could have been thinking, well, I could use this for something else or submit it again, for example. But there are also definite things that chime between the two designs. Obviously, the Celtic influence, which was so fashionable at the time, the dragons, the serpents, and these wonderfully intricate carvings. But the 1918 chair is also a little bit more understated. There's more uncarved wood in sight, but is also still just as intricate. For example, that sort of panel at the back of the chair, which has got this lattice design, is wonderfully detailed and would have taken a great deal of accomplishment to achieve. The black chair is, of course, known as such because of the tragic story of Hedd Wyn, the poet that won the chair for his ode to Yr Ysgwrn, the hero. It's known as the black chair not because the wood is particularly dark, but because of the black cloth that was draped over the chair at the ceremony in Birkenhead when it became apparent that no poet was going to stand in the audience to receive his prize. And of course, at a time of war, the chair came to symbolise far more than just that individual tragic tale. It became almost the symbol of all the empty chairs at the tables and in the homes of tens of thousands of families across Wales who had lost their sons mainly in the fighting. And of course, then this house, this piece of land here at Yr Ysgwrn has become almost a place of pilgrimage. The family have kept the door open throughout the century, and now, of course, the National Park are doing that work. It was always meant to be that people were able to visit the chair and form their own relationship with it and see this, this iconic piece of our history, which, of course, is a symbol of our literary tradition and this custom we have of awarding a poet with a throne, but also this sad, individual, but universal tale as well. I called this exhibition a Gadair Ddu ar Gadair Olau, which is roughly translatable as the black chair and the light chair, the chair of light, because of course by 1918, by late 1918, we're talking about the prospect at least of a more peaceful time of laying down arms. And I think I played into that a bit when I was interpreting. I've spoken already about what the 1917 chair came to symbolise, but in J.T. Job's life and in the life of his country and Europe and the world as well, the end of 1918 was a very symbolic time for a number of reasons. Obviously, I've mentioned the armistice, but also for J.T. Job, who had gone through many hard times in his life. He lost his wife from his first marriage and their 3 children. Also in his second marriage, he lost another child. But in 1918, things were looking slightly more hopeful for him. In a few weeks after the Eisteddfod in Nyth, his wife Catherine gave birth to their son Enaf, who did survive to adulthood and who is, of course, the father of Dafydd, who made contact with Yr Ysgwrn and let the staff here know that he had the chair made by Eugene Van Fleteren. So there's that element for J.T. Job. And then on the 10th of November 1918, obviously the day before the peace agreement, J.T. Job was travelling on the train. He was a minister, and so he was often away preaching on in different places. And he wrote a hymn for peacetime. It's called 1914 to 1918, and that's formed a core part of the interpretation for this exhibition, really, and this idea that these 2 chairs, although of course they represent our literary tradition, that they also represent far more universal, greater goings-on in the world. I think also it's worth making the point that, and I've tried to convey this slightly in the interpretation as well, we're talking about art, a piece of art made by a craftsman who was a refugee from a war-torn country. And I think that it's worth us reflecting somewhat on that in these troublesome days that we find ourselves in at the moment.
it's important to keep these things and the memory of these things alive, because um, someone once said that a nation that has forgotten its history is like an old person who has lost his memory. There is so much in our tradition and in our history that belongs to our identity. And so, for example, the tradition of poetry writing in Wales is so important. The Christian story in Wales, way back from probably at least the 3rd century onwards, Christianity has been such a huge influence in our nation. So keeping these things alive is a responsibility, and it's a privilege.